You know that Keeley Companies is all about fostering the world-class culture through their incredible cultural pillars. Well, it was time to add a seventh cultural pillar, Keeley Green. Guided by the mission to raise the sustainability standards by which they design, build, operate, and live, Keeley Green is dedicated to using a holistic approach to leave a positive impact on our environment, create a future that is sustainable for generations to come. In the words of Rusty Keeley, we are just getting started. You can learn more about that just getting started mentality and all the work they do by visiting my friends at Keeley Companies online at KeeleyCompanies.com.
Welcome to the Live Inspired podcast with John O'Leary. John is the two-time national best-selling author of On Fire and In Awe. He's a world-class inspirational speaker, the host of the Live Inspired podcast, and he's the real-life inspiration behind the major motion picture Soul on Fire. Each week, John interviews extraordinary individuals about their life stories so you can more fully live your life story. Here's your host, John O'Leary.
Well, hello, my friends, and welcome to the Live Inspired podcast with John O'Leary. Andrew Zimmern is our guest today. He is an Emmy-winning, James Beard Award-winning chef. He's a television host, he's an author, and he's a global food advocate. Recognized from the wildly popular show, I'm sure many of you have seen it, called Bizarre Foods, Andrew explores culture through cuisine. And yet, before the successes, before climbing to the highest rung, Andrew's life was marked by addiction, by homelessness, and by hard-won second chances that eventually led him toward his purpose. Today, Andrew joins us to share how curiosity saved his life, why asking for help became his turning point, and how food became the lens through which he learned to see people, cultures, and himself more clearly. My friends, if you've ever felt stuck in your past or ashamed of your mistakes or unsure how to begin anew, this conversation today is for you. You will leave this episode reminded that you are not your worst chapter, that curiosity can reopen closed doors, and that second chances are not just rare, they're available to anyone brave enough to ask for help and keep stepping forward. So family, pull your chair up a little bit closer, grab your favorite Live Inspired journal. Welcome my friend, now yours, his name, Andrew Zimmern. Andrew, welcome to Live Inspired with John O'Leary.
Thank you very much. Good to be here.
Well, dude, I'm not sure I've ever interviewed anyone with as long a working resume as yours. And so rather than reading it all out and boring the audience back to sleep, if you had to introduce yourself as the show began, if you bump into someone in a grocery store and they say, Andrew, tell me about you, what's the first thing you say about you?
That I am adventurous, teachable, and incredibly curious. I think the toughest question that I ever get is when you have to fill out forms that have like a 2-inch line after the question and it says occupation. What is my occupation? What do I do? I think at the end of the day, looking backwards, trying to maintain an atmosphere of curiosity with people, right? I want them to be curious about the rest of the world. I want them to be curious about the documentaries I make. I want them to be curious about different foods, about lifestyle choices. Underneath that is some adventure, right? And I think none of those exist if you are not willing to be teachable. So it's sort of like a noble circle kind of thing. I keep trying to come up with a physical, two-dimensional drawing on a wall that says it really simply, but nothing really does. The other one that's really funny is when I'm blurbing someone's book and the publisher says, you have 18 characters, right?
Yes.
What are you? And invariably, they always settle on chef, teacher,
Wow.
which chef, comma, teacher, which I don't object to. I don't object to. So, because I think both of those words sort of say it all. And technically, since I teach classes and because I am a chef and was a chef and will be a chef, I think it all works. So, yeah, it's a toughie though. How about old curmudgeonly guy that occasionally says something that people find interesting?
Well,
Totally doesn't fit in the space.
I hope you do that job today well. So here we go. If Norman Rockwell had to draw a picture of
Hmm.
what the Americano family looks like, it might have been mine growing up. The idyllic version of it. Mom to my left, father to my right, three siblings on the other bench, two siblings on both sides, a high chair on the corner, and on the opposite corner, there was a golden retriever eating scraps and getting big.
Love it.
Out the window, dude, was a picket fence. Like that was my 70s, 80s childhood. You had a bit of a different picture that Rockwell would have drawn of yours. Can describe for
Yeah.
our audience what your childhood was like?
Some of us live that cliche when we're younger, and then things change later. Everybody, if we're lucky enough to be on this planet for long enough, has all the arcs built in and all the archetypes get experienced. Mom, dad, born in 1961, single child, family of privilege in New York City. My father had been in the Navy and decided that he was going to marry his best friend and have a child. I think my mother, even though we never had a chance to speak about it, thought that it would be different if she said yes and they had a baby.
Hmm.
My father was very literal, very blunt. What he said, he meant. What he said he was going to do, he did. Classic sort of greatest generation, an incredible man who did incredible things with his life. And they divorced in 1965, 66, when I was 5, 6 years old. They maintained an incredible friendship. I arguably saw him more after the divorce than before because he had to intentionally set out to spend time with me. And he was incredibly kind to my mother. When I was 13, my mom went into a hospital to have an appendix scar covered up. The bikini lines had dropped, and she had had an appendix removal in the 30s. And they gave her the wrong anesthesia during surgery. She was in a coma for months, and it wound up changing her forever. And she never really recovered from this horrific moment in her life. And it changed everything in our family dynamic in a way that only a really big sort of tragic thing can exist. Here was my mother still alive, a shell of her former self, not really thinking, feeling, acting, or doing as she was able to
Right.
prior to this massive brain injury, and very limited in her thinking scope and ability to do things. My father, typical product of his generation, when he walked me back to what was my mother's apartment, the old family apartment where she lived, said, we talked about it for about 20 minutes on the walk from the hospital after I got back from summer camp and saw my mother in an oxygen tent. And he walked me back to the apartment with that sort of air of, well, we've talked about it. Now let's take all our feelings, bundle them up, package them, grease them well, because we are going to stuff them down as far as we possibly can and never talk about them again. My mother's accent sort of changed my life forever. I really struggled with what I later found out many, many years later, as in like 10 years ago later, that what my father did that day, which I saw as a very wonderful thing. He set me up in an apartment. There were caregivers there. He went back to his house. I would see him 2 or 3 times a week. It seemed to be the appropriate response. I later learned that it was a fairly big abandonment. I don't use that word lightly, and I don't condemn him for it. It's not an angry thing. It's just by definition, that's what it is. I was in a workshop once and someone said to me, how old is your son? And my son at the time was 14 or something. The person running the workshop said, would you do that to your son? I was like, absolutely. He described a typical scenario and said, so do you put your son in that apartment? I'm like, oh, no, absolutely. Never. I take him with me or I move in. And it hit me like a ton of bricks. So I sought out the only thing in life that I had experienced that would help me not feel what I was feeling, which was drugs and alcohol. And I was off to the races. I think I also had something inside of me that had always wanted more of everything. I had already experienced that. I wanted one more run when we were skiing. I wanted one more bite of food. I wanted one more, whatever it was that was making me happy at the moment was never quite enough. It never filled the bucket totally, and I was always looking to fill the bucket. So once I discovered drugs and alcohol, that was it. Off to the races. I became a real New York City garbage head when it came to putting chemicals into my body. It wound up almost killing me several times until I finally sobered up about 33 years ago.
So I want to come back to when you were 13, but I want to start with you mentioned about a decade ago, you're in this workshop and someone says to you, how old is your son? And you say, he's 14. He's a great kid. And they say,
Yep.
would you do what your daddy did? And you said,
hmm
absolutely not. And that's when it hit you. When you say that, what do you mean by it's so clear, but how did that knowledge then, that truth then change the way you felt about your experience, about your relationship, about your childhood, about your life?
It, it made sense to me.
Yeah.
Trauma and shame are feelings that we not only carry with us, they're extremely, extremely destructive. A close third is resentment. I had a process in my life for dealing with resentment. I can recognize resentment. I know how to get rid of resentments. Trauma and shame had such a huge impact on my life until that moment that I was able to accept that my father, who I had put on a pillar,
Yeah.
a fairly large pillar, and by the way, I still have him on
Yeah.
a pillar.
Well, you speak about him in
I
the
just
present tense as being a wonderful man, a great leader.
100%, 100%. However, he made some huge mistakes in his life. And I think to answer your question more specifically, it allowed me to forgive myself of mine a
Wow.
little bit. Another level of detail, I continually, every year go somewhere for 5 days to a week to do some emotional sobriety work on myself. And that was why I was at Rio Retreats doing this men's intimacy workshop, and stuff about my dad came up. And this is when this practitioner who was guiding this incredible session challenged me. He just very matter of factly was listening to my story and he said, well, yeah, your dad abandoned you. You suffered that abandonment. That is one of those core things that has created this trauma and the shame. Went through this whole thing and you can't let go. And I was very angry. I mean, I was verbally abusive at that point. He stripped me down to I was really raw all over. And I responded with incredible resistance, so much so that he had to construct a scenario by which I could understand what he meant. And when he looked at me and he said, okay, roles reversed. Your son's mom is in the hospital. You're walking him up from New York Hospital to, 142 East 71st Street. And you say goodbye to your son, give him a hug, and tell him that you'll see him on Wednesday night. And I was like, absolutely. And it just hit me like a ton of bricks that it was an abandonment, but it was also okay. He was trying his best. And a lot of us say that about our parents. Kids don't come with a set of instructions when they're
Right.
born. My parents were not trying to hurt me, they were not trying to inject me with something that would later put me in a position to be hurt based on those experiences. They were trying to give me every advantage that I possibly could have. What a incredible life my father had provided for me. What a great example in so many ways. However, what a failure when it came to that moment in my life. And human beings are human beings. We make human mistakes. All of us do. We say
Right.
human things that we wish we could take back. Everybody does. I think the healing comes when you can see it in yourself, in your own life, and be able to accept yourself as being human. And so that moment was about two things. One, being able to see my father's role in my life accurately, because I
Right.
tend to not see things accurately. I tend to put things in context that makes for a great story, a great moment for me, fits in my narrative, which is not always accurate, right? I'm not saying that I practice fiction or lie to myself. It's just that our own narratives come with our own bias, right? With my being able to see my father accurately in that moment, the light bulb of forgiveness for myself came on, because one thing I had struggled with in my first 20 years of sobriety was being able to forgive myself for the things that I had done. And I worked really hard at it, but nothing really seemed to work. It wasn't externally that damaging, it was really internally damaging. I wasn't as peaceful inside. I wasn't as accepting of life on life's terms as I was once I was able to forgive myself, but I needed something to happen in order to do that. And that moment in that workshop, in that room with that group leader in my time on the hot seat there was that moment. And I'm really grateful for it. I still worship my dad. My dad was incredible. Every time I talk about him, I tell people the same thing. I say, I wish you could have met him. He was quite something.
I think that's cool to be able to hold both their beauty and their brokenness with both hands and still love the one in front of you. It's a
100,
rare concept these days to be able to
100%.
see the brokenness in someone else, their obvious mistakefulness, and yet still to say, and I loved them and they loved me to the best degree they could. So
But
one of the things that amazes me really most about your story, and there's a whole
can,
lot of things.
can I just point something out, though? You used a really important word there that is a guidepost for me. A long time ago, I stopped using the word but. I
Amen.
just eliminated it from my life. And the person who recommended this to me, I looked at them, I said, how do I do that? And they said, just use the word and.
Yeah.
And it works about 98% of the time. And sometimes when I'm writing, I stop and I go back. When I'm editing, I take out the buts. And sometimes I have to rewrite the whole sentence. However, I eliminate that word and I use the word and a lot because and is so, so important in our lives. When tragedy hits or something, and it's going to get better, and you've survived 1,000% of your worst days, and the sun is going to come up tomorrow, and you're going to feel differently in a while. And is such an important word. So I'm glad you used it.
And I'm glad you brought that up. And most people are living in the world of but right now. So thank you for reminding us of the power of and. Yes, and it's powerful in improv and equally powerful and empowering in life. So here you are, man. This kid, for all intents and purposes, whether we like it or not, has been abandoned by a dad who's doing the best he can, a mom who's unable to perform the motherly duties around the house. You're raising yourself. You become addicted to alcohol, then drug use, and somehow you keep stumbling forward. Like the amazing thing is you keep moving forward. You get through high school, you go to Vassar College, you're addicted throughout the entire time. What were you hoping to do with your life as you looked beyond college?
I had no plan. I was struggling, but by the time I was in college, I was struggling day to day to survive. The weight of that was immense. I made it so much more difficult for myself than it had to be.
Hmm.
You know, there are many problems with addiction. There are many problems with living a life where you are not talking about what's really going on and not doing the work that's in front of you as you walk through it. One of those problems is that the bags of crap you are filling up every day just make it more difficult to get up in the morning. They make it more difficult to, in the case of school, go to class, socialize with other people, learn how to navigate life, pay. That's what we do in college. We pay a bill, we show up, we talk to a friend. We think of it as going to school, right? But you learn so many other things when you leave home at 18 and go away to college, right? And I just made it so much more difficult for myself. I had no space to hold a goal. I had no space to hold a dream. Everything was a snap decision based on how I was going to get through the day or maybe what was going to happen tomorrow. I had been cooking at that time for years. I had begged my parents when I was 14. My dad said, no more allowance. I was shocked. He said, go get a job. So I got a job at my godmother's seafood restaurant in East Hampton, Long Island, and started cooking. I had been cooking my whole life in my grandmother's kitchen, in my mother's kitchen. I knew my father had taught me how to shuck clams at a very early age. I knew how to do the things that I was tasked to do in that restaurant, that first job. So I shined and I was able to learn and keep moving on. The one constant through everything was when everything fell apart, getting kicked out of I was kicked out of school 3 times. Each time I would go away to Europe or to Asia and cook for 6 months somewhere. By the time I got out of college, I had a double degree in history and art history, which some people are very impressed by. But if it takes you 5.5 years to get through school, you just build up enough credits in your concentrated departments. So it really isn't anything to be that proud of. I think it looks good on a piece of paper, but it really represented a dismal failure on my part at the time. However, being able to cook, being able to learn how to read, write, and think critically in that 6 year period I call college set me up for immense success, not only in the few years following college, where I took off like a rocket ship in my profession, while I was able to handle the addiction piece until it became completely unmanageable and almost killed me, but it became especially valuable many years later in my 40s and 50s when I finally was able to put together food and the idea of learning to read, write, and think critically. I think that really back then provided the little that engine for
Yeah.
success 35 years later. And I think that's to me, that's the fascinating part of life. I didn't learn how to balance books and then became an accountant. It wasn't smooth transition, but many years later, when I was able to put together everything I loved in this world, it became extremely powerful to me as an engine for success.
We could talk about hitting rock bottom and some of the things you were doing. I'm curious as you talk about skyrocketing, this Icarus moment, man, you're getting so close to the sun that you come crashing back down. When you're at rock bottom, do you know it? Most of our listeners
Yes.
and
Oh
viewers,
yeah, 100%.
we have never been there. We don't really understand what that's like. So you, my friend, late 20s, you
Yeah.
know you're at rock bottom when you're there.
Yes, except you don't know that it can get worse.
Oh.
And it can. And that's the crazy part of alcoholism and addiction is that it's a physical, mental, and spiritual malady. And we know that now scientifically. I mean, this is not my idea. And we could talk for hours about that, but I would encourage people to do a little research on it. I mean, we know it's a physical disease, we know it's a mental health disease. It's also a spiritual malady. There is a hopelessness, there is a reliance on self that keeps hurting us over and over and over again because we have no belief in anything bigger than we are, right?
Mhm.
And we think things are bad, but they get worse. I'll give you a great example. Towards the end, the sheriff of New York comes knocking at my door. I'm in an apartment that I'd scammed my father into buying for me. It was, I mean, it's a complete and total mess. Hadn't paid my money into the co-op. The sheriff of New York handles evictions. That's what he does. And I get evicted. I'm allowed to bring one bag with me. Everything else goes into a storage thing that I didn't pay. I lost all of my possessions, everything I inherited from my grandmother, everything that I accumulated over the course of the first 29 years of my life. And I went downstairs to the 23-hour bar. They closed for an hour at like 6 in the morning to hose the place out and to drag anyone out onto the street who had passed out. I mean, this was a shot in a beer bar behind the train station in the West 30s in Manhattan. It looked like the last stop on the train where the next one was the eighth circle of Dante's Inferno. I mean, this is the place people cross the street so you don't pass in front of the door. I'm being serious. And this is where
Yeah.
I went every night and knew the people. And there was this toothless bearded guy named AJ. I'll never forget him. He sort of ran the place on the customer side. He knew everyone and settled fights. When he said something at the bar, everyone kind of nodded. If you didn't agree with AJ, I could never understand that until the night that I was evicted because AJ ran the little bottle gang that scooted around the corner to drink, Mad Dog 2020 or whatever somebody had before we could go back into the bar and hang out. But he also ran, because he had found it, an abandoned building down on Sullivan Street, a beautiful part of New York right now. Back then, just a windswept, empty neighborhood of abandoned buildings. And there was a building there that 8 or 9 guys slept in, pirated electricity from a few houses over, casements where there should be windows. He said I could stay there. That's where I slept for a year on a pile of dirty clothes that had been in that duffel bag that I carried out of that apartment, stealing so that I had money for food, stealing jars of Comet Cleanser or Ajax to sprinkle around the pile of dirty clothes I passed out on every night so the rats and roaches wouldn't crawl over me. I realized that was as bad as life could get. I was completely a user of people and taker of things. People who loved me thought I was dead. I was, from a moral standpoint, crossing every single line I had ever put in the sand as I had built the healthy part of my life. I will never steal from innocent people. Of course I did it. I will never do X. I will never do. I mean, I crossed every single line you could imagine. And yet that wasn't bottom. But
Mm.
at the time, I sure thought it was. One day I had the idea that there were winners and losers in life and that I was just a loser. You know, the dice just kept rolling and I ran out of chips to bet and I ran out of opportunities to throw. It was hopeless. And there was that moment then where I did lose all hope, had none. That idea of, well, tomorrow I will, even if it was fantasy, because when I was at my bottom and sleeping in that abandoned building, you were thinking to yourself, tomorrow I'm going to do this. Tomorrow I'm going to shave and get a job. Tomorrow I'm going to stop drinking, right? All BS. That just lies that your brain tells you to keep you going, you know? And there's a part of that that's trying to save you, right? There's a part of that voice that's just trying to get you to enough tomorrows so that maybe you have a lot of tomorrows.
Yes.
But that voice got drowned out by the hopelessness of my situation. And I decided, well, the smart thing is I'm going to steal some jewelry from my godmother. I'm going to hawk it. I'm going to get some money. I'm going to buy some barbiturates. I'm going to buy some vodka. I'm going to check into the San Pedro Hotel, which is no longer in existence, over on the East 50s. It was a flop house, the last of its kind in Midtown Manhattan. You rent rooms by the hour kind of place. Homeless people didn't live there. It was more for filthy assignations, criminality, and other kinds of things. I went in there and swallowed a handful of barbiturates and drank a bottle of vodka and, every intention of dying. I don't remember the lights going out metaphorically, but I woke up. What we've been able to piece together about 2.5 days later, I had a moment of clarity, right? That I'm not responsible for. I later ascribe it to something bigger than me. I went out in the hallway and plugged the bottom of the phone cord back into the base, which I had disconnected because I didn't even want to hear a phone ring. And, put my quarters in
Mm.
and called my friend and said the words that I literally had never used in the first 30 years of my life. I mean, literally never. And that was, can you help me?
Mm.
And I thought I knew everything the first 30 years of my life. And it occurred to me, like, look where it got me. Look where it got me. I tried to kill myself in a flea bag hotel and I'm absolutely hopeless. I mean, completely hopeless. At that point, in that hopelessness, I still, when my friend came to get me, tried to take back all the rest of my life. Oh, if you just lend me $5,000, I can do this, I can do that. I started hustling almost immediately, coming back from the dead and hustling almost immediately. One of my best friends, who I've been able to mentor in a 12-step program for 31 years, who's now like a brother to me, died and overdosed and was brought back with paddles at Boston General Hospital. The first thing he did when left alone in the room 20 minutes after he was brought back to life was steal drugs, shoot up again, and the same thing happened a second time, right?
Yeah.
That's the insanity of this disease. And so I immediately started hustling and doing my thing again. But 2 days later, when I walked into what was my intervention, I just said, what time's my plane?
Mm.
Because something happened between being on the sidewalk and walking into this room and actually walking into the room. I mean, in those 10 steps between being outside on the street, walking into a building to meet someone for coffee and seeing that there were 20 people who cared about me in a circle waiting to talk to me. And I knew what it was. I gave up trying to run my own life, figure it out, hustle, run my show. I gave up this idea of knowing everything. And I gave into this idea that I would just do whatever anyone told me because my way of doing things hadn't worked. That may be, if you really want to get technical about it, if you want to talk about a bottom, maybe the bottom isn't the tragic moment in the dumpster, right? However you describe that dumpster. Maybe the bottom is when you get out of the dumpster and that moment where you're willing to change right before you actually change. That may truly be the bottom because for me, I'm on the sidewalk walking to that building, still trying to figure out what the hustle is. I was going to meet that friend for coffee only because my friend Clark, whose apartment I was staying in, had said, you should meet with her. I didn't want him to kick me out because I had nowhere else to go.
January 28th,
Yep,
almost like a birthday, 1992. That's
it
when,
is a birthday. I celebrate it every single year.
happy birthday, man.
Thank you.
It's the beginning of the next chapter. At Hazleton, my understanding is you have a journal and you fill it up not with words like I am worthy, I'm enough, I'm taking the steps, I'm moving forward, my best days are in front of me. The words you keep writing on the journal again and again and again is it's hopeless. I'm hopeless. I'm hopeless. When did that chicken scrabble
I
begin?
wrote two things. I wrote, I'm hopeless, and I alternated it, not literally, but I still have the book. It's held together with rubber bands. It's in my office so that I see it every day when I'm at work. It has another line in it written over and over, which is, I don't want to hurt anyone anymore. I didn't know how to be hopeful and I didn't know how to stop hurting people. I didn't know how to get out of my own way.
So you begin learning. We could spend hours going on the recovery journal, and that's before you even begin your career and the books and the broadcasts and everything else you've
Well, I'll
done.
sum it up for you very quickly. The irony is that I was still hopeless, but I had learned to say, I don't know how to do blank. Can you help me? I'm 2 weeks into treatment, and I still think everyone else in my unit's going to get well, and I'm not going to get well. I just kept complaining about this over and over to my two closest friends on my unit. Young man named Cardi Fox, who died of a brain tumor over a decade ago, and my friend Chuck. Chuck and Cardi pointed out on the wall where they have the 12 steps of the 12-step program that I still am involved in on a daily basis, that there's a promise hidden in the 12th step. And it says, having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps. The reason I was struggling was that I thought everyone else was going to have this spiritual awakening that everyone says you have to have in order to get sober, to get dry and stay sober and ultimately sober. The reason the spiritual awakening is important is that that's 1930s speak when a lot of these materials were written for understanding there's a power bigger than you. You're not in charge. For so many people, they grow up knowing, yeah, I'm not in charge. It's my parents early on, then other things are in charge of my life. I had no idea there was anything bigger than me. I was self-centeredness run wild. I think like all alcoholics and drug addicts, they pointed that out. I had another one of those awakenings like I did with that idea of abandonment and my own father's failure. I literally walked out of that cafeteria. We were eating dinner, actually, a changed person because I realized, oh, I can have a rote experience. I can go through these steps. Immediately that night, right after dinner, I asked the first person who was speaking on the stage at Bigelow. Actually, his girlfriend was speaking, and she talked about this amazing man she met. I went up to that amazing man because he was there afterwards and asked him to mentor me in our 12-step program. He said, well, if you make it through this place and you get down to St. Paul, who knows where you're going to be. But yeah, here's my number. Don't bother calling me until you get to the Twin Cities if you do. And I did. And he was my sponsor up until his death last July. But that is what set me on the course to success. The horrific part of this disease is that ultimately Chuck went on to extended treatment and joined me at that same halfway house 3 months later after I'd gotten there. And it was great having my buddy there. One night, Chuck, instead of coming home after work, drank and went up a down ramp on Highway 94 and killed himself in a car and the people in the car that he hit.
Oh,
And I still I enjoy talking about that, not in a perverse way, but as a reminder to me about the
hubris.
the mercurial part of
Yes.
life, right? We don't know what's going to happen next. The person who actually carried the message to me that arguably mattered the most in my sobriety and me just being alive right now couldn't stay sober and died 6 months into his sobriety back in the late spring, early summer of 1992. I don't think a day goes by that I don't think about him. But suffice to say, I put together a lot of sober days and predicated my life on a different set of rules, most importantly, service work. And that's even where the idea for Bizarre Foods came about. On our medallions, you wish me happy birthday. It says patience, tolerance, and understanding on some of our medallions. It says it in our literature a lot. And I actually, when I pitched Bizarre Foods to the Discovery people in the early 2000s, I told them I wanted to make a show about food that taught people to practice patience, tolerance, and understanding with each other in a world that wasn't having a lot of it. And I could sense back then, I've always been very empathic, that our world was starting to treat each other with a lot more finger pointing, and there was a lot less brotherhood in the classic sense and sisterhood. We were defining ourselves by our differences and not by our commonalities. I wanted to make a food show because I thought food was the ultimate communicator. I never sat down and had a meal with someone and liked them less after I got up. And I wanted to make that show. And the person who was running Travel Channel at the time, Pat Young, a brilliant TV executive, said, well, that's 80% education, 20% entertainment. We don't do that. That's, go to PBS. They'll make that show. It'll be a 6-parter. You'll get a lot of applause and you'll be right back where you started from. He said, but if you come back here tomorrow and tell me how you're going to make that show, because he was intrigued by the idea of eating foods from the fringe. And he said, show me something that is 80% entertainment and 20% education, and you'll last on TV for decades. He said, and we'll make that show. He was right. I came in the next day, I repitched it, and I was off to the races.
I have a friend in sales. His name is Brian Buffini. He listens to the podcast. He has his own big podcast. Buffini says, give them what they want so you can give them what they need.
Yeah, 100%. Well, I call it the Trojan horse. I basically sold them a Trojan horse because I had studied television and I knew that year one, I don't make any decisions. I'm just talent and everybody tells me what to do. I'm a mechanism, I'm a tool in the toolbox. Walk here, say this, do that. Obviously, you bring a little bit of yourself into it, but you were told what to do. You are what we refer to as first-time talent in this business. But once the show became successful, I mean, there was literally episode 3, it went from being watched by a few people to being a runaway hit thanks to an appearance on Jay Leno's show, which for those listening who are too young is what ultimately became the Jimmy Fallon show. But it was the Tonight Show and it was the biggest PM talk show in the history of the universe. Then when it took off, all of a sudden the polarity reverses and I can inject more of what I felt was important, what I felt people needed to hear into those shows. So season 1 was good and it had a lot of bug eating and it got me season 2. But boy, in season 2 and all the way up to the next couple hundred episodes, and then all the other shows that came from it, from Delicious Destinations to Bizarre World to all the other shows that I did for Discovery, even the shows that I've done for MSNBC or the stuff that I've produced for other networks through my production company that I'm not even in. Right. We are able to have a point of view thanks to that early success of Bizarre Foods. And we're able to have a message that is sent out to the world that we hope has a positive effect, because that's why I make media. to make a positive change in the world.
I think most of us tuned in to watch you eat bugs, but most
Yes.
of us tuned back in to see the beauty of the culture that you were in front of. So I want to ask you a little bit about the culture, a little bit
Yeah,
about the
sure.
work, and
Sure.
I'm going to use your quotes, and then you tell me what you're telling me. Please be a traveler, not a tourist. Try new things, meet new people, and look beyond what is right in front of your eyes.
What you see is what's in front of the veil, and you need to step forward and push the veil aside and see what's really going on. I'll give you a great example. Jama the fisherman. I was with him in Madagascar. This fellow had the worst life of anyone I've ever seen. Had no possessions. At one point, had 8 kids, only 3 were alive. He lived in a group of grass huts on the edge of the ocean and fished in what are arguably the most dangerous waters that exist. And he fished out of a wooden canoe with an outrigger that he had built a handmade sail in, and he had his youngest child sit in the sail. He didn't have any way to pull the sail in or maneuver it, so his son sat there and stuck his legs out and gripped his toes on the gunnels of this canoe. Jama eventually would come home with a king mackerel, and his family would eat the head and tail, and he would trade the body of the fish for whatever he needed: shorts for his kid, a comb for his wife's hair, whatever he needed that day, he would trade that fish for. I asked him, "Are you happy?" It was such a great learning moment for me. He
Right.
looked at me without saying, "You're a complete idiot." He smiled and he said, "Of course, what a ridiculous question." And he spread his arms out. He said, "I have everything. I have people who love me. I have the ocean. I have the sea. I have the sky." He said, "I don't have a worry in the world." And he meant it. He meant it.
Mm.
So the veil that I was pushing behind was what I was bringing my white Western viewpoint to on that beach, and looking at a Sakalava tribes person who lived on the edge of his tribe, right? And I had to push away that veil and see what was really going on, because what was really going on was a man who had lived his life exactly the way he wanted to all the time, and
Mm.
had showed up over and over again, despite the tragedies, despite his homes blowing down, despite fish being there one day and not another day. He lived his life his way and was completely accepting of it.
This one sounds like it comes from a foodie, and I guess it does, but I think it speaks to a universal truth. So here we go. Food is a lens through which we understand the world.
I think so. I mean, the other cultural constants are math and music, right? If you take away the mixtape that some girl gave me in college, I can recreate it on Spotify or Apple Music in about 30 seconds. But if you take away bread or rice, that is the stuff that revolutions are made of. Blood runs in the streets. I use food not to unmask revolution. I use food as a tool, I call it a lens, through which to see everything. I mentioned a while back that things I learned in college about reading, writing, and thinking critically later came to really inform me.
Right.
I had an art history teacher, Madame Koretsky. She was the head of the Northern Renaissance department, and she taught that introductory course. And the very first day, she put up a slide, a Northern European painting. I think it was a Holbein, but there was a table, there was a bowl of fruit, there was a window, there was a dad, there was a beautiful teenage girl. There were 12 or 14 objects, quote unquote, in the room, right? Table, chair, bowl, fruit, etc. She asked everyone to write down what they saw. Day one of this class, everyone writes down what they saw. And then like Hercule Poirot or Agatha Christie, or Miss Marple, she
Mm.
literally begins to solve this closed door murder mystery. And she describes 16th century Northern Dutch life based on what she saw in that painting. She saw a tropical fruit in the bowl, which means they were very wealthy. She saw boats through the window, which meant he was a trader. She saw a jeweled brooch on this woman's shawl, which, if a teenage girl has that, means the father's very wealthy. And she kept going through this painting revealing pieces of culture layer by layer by layer, peeling back this onion. Flash ahead 30 years, I'm in the jungles of Nicaragua in what's called a jungle market, where everyone sort of gathers once a week. Farmers, traders, whomever, they sell bush meat, they trade trinkets. If someone has a metal pot to sell, they'll bring it there. And because a lot of the people who are stopping there are carrying bananas that they grow or wheelbarrowing coconuts somewhere where they're going to sell it for a few pennies, women make food and sell it to these hungry travelers and tradespeople. It's sort of the essence of a jungle market, right? And everyone sort of shows up and trades the news of the day and maybe drinks some homemade booze or something. It's really quite extraordinary to be in the middle of a jungle and experience a true jungle market. And there were these women, and they had this pot of chanfaina, which is a stew made of the guts, everything that you would throw away on a pig, right? The chopped stomach, the intestines, parts of the head, tail, hooves, and they just cook it for hours till it's all falling apart. And you don't stir it too heavily because you want bones and certain things to fall to the bottom. And they served me a bowl of it, and there were these three white blobs floating in it. And the translation was they were eggs, right? Then they kept pointing up in the trees, and we realized that they were iguana eggs, where the yolk stays runny, the white is not. I mean, you can eat it, just no one does. You bite this white hard albumin, and you suck out the yolk, and you eat the chanfaina, but it's the eggs are so high in protein, they're really good for you. So is the chanfaina, by the way. And I looked at the camera with this bowl in front of me because you had to do this, it's TV. You're trying to tell a story. And I showed this bowl, and I said the words to the camera, I can tell you everything about this group of people I'm spending time with by what they're eating. Everything. They're hunters and gatherers based on what they have, right? They're pig farmers. They're selling the pig meat, right? They may only have one or two pigs, right? They're always keeping a female, right? So they can get piglets and raise them. That's how they make their money. They have to clean the pigs to sell them in the marketplace. They don't sell them live. So they're making stuff to eat with the guts, and they're making extra money by selling. I kept going through sort of everything I was learning by what was in it, right? What vegetables they grew, where they would get them, what they would have to trade for, because there was no farming area for miles and miles. So they had to be trading for them because people lived in a very, very small geographic footprint. And I realized I was doing the same thing that Madame Koretsky had done in 1979 in September when I was sitting in her Art 101B classroom. I was doing it in 2009 in the jungles of Nicaragua on television. And that learning to read, write, and think critically and going through my life experience, which had led me, even my failed suicide, my recovery, what I learned in recovery, the service work that I had learned in recovery was what would keep me sober. All of those big tent poles in life, those moments for me allowed me to become the storyteller that I am. Because if you've experienced it yourself, you can recognize it in other people. I wished I had met Charles Kuralt. He passed away. I never had a chance to meet him. I loved watching his show on Sunday mornings when it was on, and it was called On the Road for those that never saw it. He was so good at what he did, and I've realized thinking back, he must have had a way more complex life than we
Right.
ever. I mean, his generation didn't, all the truth isn't there for us to see.
Right.
But I think he had one hell of a set of life experiences because in order to be a storyteller like that, you can't just develop that kind of empathy. It doesn't work. And he was an only. And that's another lesson I took. Better to be the only than be the best. If you try to be the best, I don't know whose definition of best you're using. It's impossible to be the best. It's only later that people say, oh, Serena Williams, the best, right?
That better be the only than the best.
Much better. Try to be an only. So if I have to eat an iguana egg every once in a while in order to get my point across, at least I'm doing something no one else is doing.
Andrew, man, I could spend hours just visiting with you about iguana eggs, about cooking, about recovery, about life. We have 7 questions that tether every one of our guests together. They're called the Live Inspired Seven. Out here we go. Question number one. What's been the most impactful book you've ever read?
James Beard's Theory and Practice of Good Cooking.
Not surprising considering that you've been profoundly influenced through James Beard, undoubtedly. What's one?
Well, I will tell you, I suck at lightning rounds. I turn lightning rounds into slow clouds rolling, but it's about cooking. But I got more about life from that book than anything else because what he did was he taught you the reasons behind it. And it impact, if there's not a reason to do it, if you don't have a reason to be in a room, leave. If you don't have a reason to do something else.
Yeah.
It was about more than cooking to me, maybe because of the time that I read it.
Mm. What's one positive characteristic or one trait that you possessed as a little kid growing up in New York that you wish you exhibited as brilliantly today?
Telling the truth.
If your home caught fire and all living things are out and you have an opportunity of running back inside and grabbing one item, what's that one physical thing you'd come racing back outside with?
Wow. This is probably the worst answer you're ever going to get. My laptop.
We've heard it before, man.
It
You're not alone in that
it
lousy
holds
answer.
it holds everything. That I would like to think that my laptop would be sitting on top of 2 gifts that I received. One is a first edition of the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous
Wow.
that my friend Kevin Boehm gave me, a restaurateur in Chicago. And the other one is a set of escargot forks that my friend Will Guidara, who wrote Unreasonable Hospitality and ran 11 Madison Park when it was the #1 restaurant in the world, that he gave me, both of which had very intentional reasons behind them, but they are 2 of my most prized possessions. Oh, and my grandmother's salt cellar.
Oh, that's cool. Well, listen, you got 2 hands. You got the ability to hold 2 things in each of them. So I'll let you grab all 4. If you could sit on a bench on a gorgeous day and have a long conversation with anyone living or deceased, who would you like to be next to?
That has changed for me over the years. Not the first time that I've heard that question. I used to say Teddy Roosevelt. I used to say my dad. There were a lot of people that I cycled through there. I want to talk to a change maker now. It would probably be the president of the United States.
What's the best advice Roosevelt, Dad, President of the United States, or anyone else ever gave you? So the best advice you've ever received, Andrew, is
The best advice that I ever received was from my deceased recovery mentor, my old sponsor, Jim Linden, and that was invest in the loss.
ooh,
And what he meant by that was it wasn't about recklessness. It was just like, don't always think that the payoff is immediate. When you're making an investment, if your gut tells you to do something, invest in that loss. It wasn't about economically at all. He was talking about behavior and lifestyle and how you show up each day as a human being. It has proved to be the most impactful thing that I've ever learned.
what advice, if you could go back in time just a couple years and whisper some wisdom to yourself at age 20, does that kid need to hear?
Oh my gosh, that's easy. You don't know anything, right? You don't. You haven't lived, you haven't experienced. When other people tell you something, listen. I mean, it's that whole concept of I don't, can you help me? I don't know. I would say use that sentence.
Hmm. Andrew Zimmern, it has been said that all great people can have their lives summed up in one sentence. How would you like yours to read?
He tried his best. I think that's all we can do. I certainly haven't tried my best my whole life. I'd like to think I'm trying my best now, but that's also a lie that I tell myself and that I tell other people publicly. I think we try our best and to quote you, and
Hmm.
we all know there are places that we're not trying our best. And I think what's important about saying those words out loud is that maybe it helps take a couple of those places where we're not trying 100% to be our best, that we do. And we just keep growing as human beings. All of us are works in progress. No one ever gets there. We're works in progress.
Well, Andrew, chef, teacher, dad, friend, I appreciate you trying your best, you taking your second chance, and you teaching the rest of us that we ought to embrace the gift of our second chance too. Thank you for
Well,
trying your
thank you.
best.
No, I appreciate it. Thank you.
My friends, that is Andrew Zimmern, and my name is John O'Leary, and today is our day. What a gift it is. Live inspired.
One of the most powerful moments in my conversation with Andrew Zimmern was when he talked about the courage it took to finally ask for help, and how real change begins when we stop running from our truth, but embrace it full tilt. If you enjoyed today's episode, and I'm sure you did, you would love my conversation with Laura McCowan. From a horrific DWI to the painful incident that led to her 4-year-old daughter in danger, Laura shares her personal journey in choosing sobriety with the utmost vulnerability and candor. It's a powerful and thought-provoking conversation that will inspire you to practice self-forgiveness and to free yourself of shame and guilt in order to take the next right step forward. You can listen to the conversation with Laura way back at episode 232, or just cruise with me right now to the Live Inspired John O'Leary podcast at johnolearyinspires.com/podcast. One more time, johnolearyinspires.com/podcast. My friends, I want to thank you for tuning into our episode week after week. I want to encourage you to share this episode wherever you are online, or working out, or working with others, or worshiping. In a marketplace with so much negativity, this is a wonderful signal reminding individuals that the foundation is firm, that God is still God, and that the best is yet to come. So for this time, and until next time, my name is John O'Leary. Today is your day. What a gift. Live with your soul on fire.
Keeley Companies was started almost 50 years ago by the one and only Larry Keeley. What started as a small family-owned paving company in St. Louis has grown to a nationally known full-service construction, development, and restoration partner. Larry the Legend, as he is affectionately known, has been a part of this growth every step of the way and continues to provide guidance as his son, Rusty, my buddy, drives their vision and achieves results on purpose. His unwavering foundation of a family culture with a focus on people has gotten Keeley Companies to where they are today, and their journey is truly just beginning. To learn more about Larry the Legend and Keeley Companies, check them out at KeeleyCompanies.com.